may and will be held against you. Hi, I'm Simcha Gotleib. I live here in North Miami Beach. I am my day job is I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine. I do acupuncture and herbal medicine. My not day job, sometimes it's day and night job, is I write, I edit. I've worn a number of different hats in my various careers. It's not about me. I'm going to just give you some sense of what this is about. And I didn't grow up in a religious family or community. I came to Chabad really to my involvement here 50 years ago, something of that nature in my youth, and I came to Crown Heights from elsewhere. I came to and so I have as a quote unquote Baal Teshuva, I've had some of my teachers have preferred the expression Mevakshe Hashem rather than Baal Teshuva. They're seeking God. There's a few other names and epithets that we've been called over the years, but whatever you call it, people who have come from whatever sort of limited background in learning and in Yiddishkeit and what have you, we kind of tend to hang together, stick together. We've learned a thing or two over the years. And the topic I was asked to speak about is Teshuva. It's El. It's El. It's a Chedesh HaTeshuva. It's a month of Teshuva. It's a Chedesh HaCheshbon. It's a month of reckoning, figuring out, where we are, where we've been, where we want to go, what wherewithal do we have to get there from here, etc. And to take stock, essentially. It's more, and in this case, it's more than take stock. It's really establish a vision. Establish a direction, an identity. The idea of Teshuva. I'm sure you've heard this many times. If you haven't heard it too many times now, you will again in the next week leading up to Rosh Hashanah. That Teshuva, or in Yom Kippur, is that Teshuva. Of course, it doesn't mean repentance. That's a very poor translation. All the world likes that word. It means return. And the idea of returning, not only returning to Judaism, not only returning to God, of course, it's returning to a relationship with God that may stand to be corrected or rectified or improved in all of our lives. But it's a return to yourself. It's a return to who you are in essence. Because we lose track of ourselves. There's a lot of distractions in this world. It's not by accident that this comes that we're in the middle of the parsha of Kiseitze la Milchama. When you go out to war, it's notable that the expression Kiseitze la Milchama is in the singular. It's not in the plural. It's very rare that a single person goes out there and has to wage war against some external enemy. We're talking about an internal battle to summon our perspectives, summon our talents and skills, summon our preferences to kind of make order out of the chaos that can happen to a person in this world, whether it's from external distractions or internal confusion or disorder, etc. We all have that. We all have that going on. And the idea of doing Teshuva in that sense is returning to the essence of who we are, of who I am, of who you are, of who one is. I don't ever like the plural expression when you're talking about who we are. We're talking about individuals here in this context. So who is this person I'm returning to? What are we talking about here? The textbook configuration, especially in Hasidus, we can say that it's returning to a relationship with your essence is the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, the chelik Elokami ma'al mamish, the portion of God that comes from above, mamish, which means it's substantial in the real, tangible world, and yet it's a portion of God, which of course is abstract, difficult to wrap your arms around. Chelik Elokami ma'al mamish comes into mamoshes. It comes into tangible, practical, perceptible entity. Is taking that abstract, difficult to identify godliness in the world, see how it's reflected and embedded and internalized in our own soul, and return to that person, return to that identity, to that soul, that aspect of the soul. Right away it's a problem because it's not the only part we've got. Again, classical Hasidus, we talk about the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamas, the godly soul and the animalistic soul. I prefer actually to sometimes to call it the human soul. That aspect of a human, which is human, more than an animal, but has certain base animalistic tendencies. So the godly soul and the human soul, they don't always get along. They're fighting over, actually the expression the Alter Rebbe uses in Tanya, they're fighting over dominance in the small city, which is the inner civilization of what's going on inside any given human being, and each one wants to dominate. So that's a fairly schematic, I would say, understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about identifying who this self is, the essence of whom we're trying to return to. I'd like to get under the hood a little bit and speak a little bit more about, address a little bit more, not just the schematic idea, Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Bahamas, but what does it really look like in an individual life? What does it look like? What is my inner battle? What does my tshuva look like? As distinct from yours and from yours. We each have an individual identity, individual struggles. Well, what you're up against is different from what he's up against, etc., and what different from what I'm up against. It depends on many, many factors, too numerous to even consider, let alone mention in this short amount of time that we have. But there is so how do we address this? First of all, there's a good friend of mine who was actually one of the first campus shluchim in America. The Bavisher Chassid named Simcha Drizin, Rabbi Simcha Drizin, is actually a good friend of your grandfather, and your grandfather. Yeah, and of mine over the years. He was a shliach at Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. For many years, he had different shlichos, and he actually went through a number of life transformations and became a therapist. He was a psychotherapist. He lives here in South Florida now. He lives not far from here. Actually, I and a few other guys have a Chassidish shir, a Zoom shir, once a week together, and he became a good friend and a mashpia and a teacher and a chavrusa. And among his tools, the tools of his trade as a therapist, there's a relatively new model of understanding human psychology, which is called IFS, the Internal Family Systems. It's about addressing the constellation of identities, of the parts of a person. We all have parts. We have an aesthetic preference. We have a certain intellectual or cognitive tendency or preference, whatever. We may have different roles and parts speaking to us from different people we met in our youth. A father and a mother and a cousin and a stranger and the kids who used to beat me up in the schoolyard. Whatever it is, we have different parts speaking to us. There's in last week's parsha it says that we'll talk about the Ben Moira, the rebellious son, who this kid is trouble, right from the start, and he gets into bigger trouble, and we have to deal with him, etc. But one of the pasukim that speaks about the triggers really that he's dealing with in his life, he says he doesn't listen to the voice of his father and the voice of his mother. That's an interesting way of expressing it, because it could have said he doesn't listen to the voice of his mother or father. But it says he doesn't listen to the voice of his father and the voice of his mother. It means to say that his mother and father are not saying the same thing. And first of all, this is an admonition to parents, that we want to be sure that we speak in the same language, speak in the same voice, really, to our children. They need to hear alignment. They need to hear that there's a partnership here. They need to see their parents even, having fun together. That they know that there's a relationship that's healthy, and that's unifying, etc. Too often, unfortunately, this child who's in trouble has heard different voices from his parents, from his father and his mother. And how much more so when you're out there in the world? This teacher says one thing, and this Rebbe says another thing, and the kids around the corner. There's a prevailing culture is very chaotic. It's very adversarial. You don't have to look too far to see in this election season over here that we're living in an adversarial world. Hopefully, we're not too focused on that, or get too distracted by the world of whatever social media. But we are. There's no question about it. There's a rabbi. His name is Beryl Wine. He happens to be an expert in Jewish history. He has a number of tapes of shiurim about history, and he's not a chassid. He's an honorable and intelligent and very learned man. Just particularly his expertise is in Jewish history. And I heard him speak one time, and he was talking about how we can grow up without being besmirched by the prevailing culture. I mean, there's a lot of schmutz out there, and whatever it is, it may not be schmutz. It may be just ill will, or emotional disturbance, or confusion, or uncertainty. He said the way he expressed it was, he said, even if we are living in a very protected, you're in a yeshiva, you're in a community, you have a religious family, and you have, and if we're fortunate enough, we're surrounded by people of a similar spiritual pursuit and nature, etc. Even so, he said, the prevailing culture will seep under the weather stripping in the door and enter our homes. The image that he used. We're all affected by what's going on out there. Some of us are looking for it. Some of us are trying to avoid it. Some of us are just so steeped in it that it takes a lot of work to get to free ourselves of these various voices and desires and inclinations and fears and what have you. We've all got some of that stuff going on. How do we integrate all that? That IFS is integrated family systems. So again, that's another way of looking at who am I? Who is this self? Who is this essential self that I'm returning to become more whole, to do teshuva, to return to who I really am? How do we define that? What's going on there? Because it's it's a jungle in there, they say, and it's not easy to sort that out. There's a number of ways to approach that. I said nefesh habahamis, nefesh elokis. Like I said, that's a sort of a schematic way of understanding the structure of the soul. And they're sometimes in conflict. Sometimes we can bring one to bear on the other. Hopefully, it's the nefesh elokis, which is ruling the small city, which is the dominant voice in our lives. But it doesn't always work that way. We need to sort, and it's not only about godly and human, godly and not godly. It's not only about that. It's more particular. It's more, it's like what are my personal values? Everybody has a different, I was gravitated towards certain aspects of my career. Other people gravitate towards some people play music. I knew when I was in yeshiva in New York, Hadar Torah was one of the first Bal Tshuva yeshivas in Crown Heights. I knew a couple of people who were very, very accomplished guitarists. Two Bachram in yeshiva. And I played guitar a little bit, but I wasn't on their level. And it was a very big part of their identity. One, because he put on a hat and put on a yarmulke and put on tefillin every day, etc. He had changed his lifestyle, and he was from. He started eating kosher, etc. He became a frum guy. He put the guitar away. So this is from Klipa. It's from the Sitra Achras, from the other side. I don't want to be trapped by my past. I'm on a new path. And the other one said, you know what? I'm not ready to do that. I'll play a little bit. I'll play Jewish music, Another guy, actually, you may know of him as one of the great Hasidic guitarist musicians in the Chabad world, Yossi Piamenta. You may have heard of Yossi. So he told me, he showed me a letter that he got from the Rebbe talking about his career in music, his tafkid, his purpose in music. The Rebbe said, rock and roll, which is what his genre was, rock and roll is basically the music of the world of chaos. Mm-hmm. And your job is to take that chaos that represents rock and roll, that is represented by rock and roll, which is that's the language you speak, and that's what you're known for, and that's what people come to hear from you, is to take that chaos and bring it into order, bring it into vessels where it can be handled, where it can be understood, where it can help us rather than confuse us, etc. So the Rebbe, he was very fortunate. The Rebbe defined his purpose, one-to-one directly. Doesn't happen to a lot of us. Didn't happen to me. It's like, I was fortunate to have Yechidus a couple of times with the Rebbe. And, in those early years, I came in the early 70s, so we're talking about an eon or so ago. And the Rebbe, I tell a few amazing stories, which I'm not going to go into now, of what I heard and what the Rebbe told me in that first Yechidus. Actually, there's a Hayom Yom from the daily teachings in Hayom Yom. There's a Hayom Yom that says that you can define your purpose in life very, very often by what you heard and the relationship you established as a chassid in your first Yechidus. Those were the days when people were fortunate to have actual Yechidus. But really, we're fortunate also to have what Yechidus was replaced by, which is Chassidus, which is a relationship with a mashpia, with our teachers, our guides, our coaches, what have you, and like that. The Rebbe has empowered the community in such a way as that he said you should have a mashpia, because the mashpia can give you what the Rebbe would have given you, and really is giving you, through the persona of the people who are whose purpose is about guiding us. So the purpose in life can become elusive. The things the Rebbe told me in that Yechidus, unlike my friend Yossi Piamenta, it still took some figuring out. And really, there were some of the things he said in that 15, 20 minutes that I was with him in his office. He answered my questions. One question he didn't answer, he actually answered a question that I hadn't asked. But I won't go into that. It's too long a story now. But it took me, in some cases, many years to parse that, to sort that out. And actually, even when I had sorted it out and kind of figured out what he was saying, 5-10 years later, it started to mean something else, something deeper, something evolved into another lesson. And Chassidus is like that. Learning is like that. There's an expression that says that Divrei Torah are anim b'machem echad and ashirim in b'machem acher. They're poor in one place, but they're rich in another place. It's contextual. The context in which we understand a given Dvar Torah. We're going out to war, and you have to treat your enemy in a certain way. You have to not chop down the trees. All these various admonitions that we have how to wage a war, and likewise in the internal war, it's contextual, because when you apply it to your own internal struggle, whether it's metaphorically or literally, it takes on a different meaning as we extend it into other areas of our life. So that's the idea of sorting out our parts, sorting out the parts of Torah that we learn, sorting out the parts internally of ourselves. Who am I? What am I? What do I represent? There's a Gemara that says one of the Tzanim was speaking to a student. He says, what was your father which mitzvah was your father the most into, most careful about, most stringent about, most enthusiastic about? It's the mitzvah that really pushed his buttons, In that case, it was Mitzvah Tzitzis. But what's important is not this. It was with a specific nature. It was very important to him. That was something that you could learn from. To us, hearing the story, we want to understand from that first and foremost that there is, that each person has an individual predilection to be particularly attracted to, enthused by, more deeply, in a deeper relationship with a certain aspect of life, a certain aspect of Yiddishkeit, of Torah, of Chassidus, and of life in general. We're not all gonna, be sitting and learning in kollel and in the tents of Torah all of our lives. We go out, and we have careers, and we have families, and we also want to accomplish something in the world to bring the chaos, to bring the light and the vessels of Torah out into the chaos of the world, so that we can be a city of refuge, so to speak, for the evil doers or the victims of the evil doers in the world, so we're going out there. Each of us has a purpose. Now, my wife is a life coach. She's an educator. She taught in LEC. She was a principal of many schools. She ran a Chabad house for many years in Pittsburgh, and she often presents to her clients a very simple way of evaluating and determining and getting a handle on what their purpose in life is about. She'll tell people, sit down, pencil and paper with a computer, do it on your phone if you must, and write a list of your core values. What do I value in life? I value creativity. I value tzedakah, charity, acts of loving kindness. I value internal integrity. I value emotional intelligence. How it is that the cognitive studies really can be internalized in a way that I'm a whole person, emotionally, cognitively, and that's consistent with the way I behave. Whatever. There are many ways to define what a person's core values are. Having done that, you can kind of zero in on that. So, given those core values, so what are my goals in life? Do I want to become a guitar player? Do I want to be a Rebbe in yeshiva? Do I want to be an acupuncturist? Do I want to be a business person? Do I want to be an accountant? What are my skills? What are my values? What are my goals? And what are my skills? And then how do I get there from here? How do I delineate my tasks, the milestones of how I'm going to create myself in the image of the vision that I am imagining for myself. And by the way, those visions will change. Inevitably, they will change. We evolve, we change, we meet other people. We have demands of, sometimes our family will help us to change, or get in the way of our not changing, whatever the case may be. And we evolve and we change, and we have to periodically reevaluate what our core values are. I'm in a different context. The person I was poor in that context of life, and then rich in another context of life, because the Divrei Torah that I was working with then, they don't apply so much to the Divrei Torah that I have to internalize and then express and then use as the tools of dealing with my life now, because I'm dealing with different internal battles. So that's part of the Teshuva. That's part of the Teshuva. We don't have to, sit down and do the homework necessarily and write out our values and goals, but even, in davening and learning and in thinking through the avoda of this coming month, essentially, we're coming up, in a month it'll be Yom Kippur. And it's a time of, if this is a time of Teshuva, imagine what Yom Kippur is. It's the core aspect of really reinventing ourselves, of coming up fresh, coming up renewed, erasing the sur me'arav aseh tov, leaving behind the distractions and the failings and the shortcomings of our past, realizing that those are also part of us, and then being able to create a new lifestyle that's going to empower us to move from that into a new lifestyle, a new way of grappling with our internal demands for the coming year and for the coming years. And we're going to bring some of that baggage with us, but we're going to bring it with us in a way that we understand it better. And right now, today, from this point, is the 9th of Elul coming into the 10th of Elul. Right now is a moment when we can set the parameters of what that battle is. And it's about right now. Who am I? Where am I going? Do I have any idea who I am? Maybe. Maybe not. The There was a great Rebbe, the Piaseczner Rebbe. They called him the Eish Kodesh. He was the leader of the Jewish, the Hasidic Jewish community in the Warsaw Ghetto during the Second World War. Very holy man. I've learned a couple of his for him way back in the day, and he said a very telling thing. He said, "You want to be in a community." This is in the Warsaw Ghetto. He said this. So imagine how difficult it would have been to enact this, to empower yourself to really be like this. It was a struggle. It was a challenge. And yet he said, "This is what you need to do. Find people of a similar spiritual goal, spiritual perspective. Become close with them, because your friends, your co-religionists, your partners, your chavrusas, the people in the confines of not the biggest part of our world, but a bigger part of the world than yourself, and learn from and share with and help one another evaluate our paths and our goals or whatever. You need the chevra. You need chevra. I was fortunate when I became religious. It was more or less with a group, a number of people who more or less became from together, which was very very fortunate. We had that kind of camaraderie, that kind of closeness, and we knew one another from before. My chavrus in those days was a guy that we had been in school together. We were in business together. We were in the restaurant business. When we first started learning, we were chavrusas, and then we each got married. And I went my way. He went. We're still friendly now. He's in Sfat. He's the co-founder and co-director of the Ascent Institute in Sfat. You may have come across. His name is Rachel Tillis, but he and I and a whole bunch of other people became from together. We had this little community, and it was in upstate New York where there wasn't much of another Jewish community. It was like it was off the beaten path of Yiddishkeit, and yet we all felt, not all at once, but over the course of a couple of years, this one got married and that one got married, etc. Whatever, and some of us just went to yeshiva, and without getting married, we kind of gravitated towards Crown Heights. And coming into Crown Heights, which was, it was kind of like, this was a community of largely immigrants in those days, a lot of Russians. The community of Crown Heights has shifted and changed and evolved over the years substantially. In those days, Yiddish was the lingua franca. That was the language you heard on the streets and in the stores and what have you. Different junctures, it became Hebrew, it became French for a while, then it became English, and now English is there are still people who their primary language is Yiddish, but the culture is really more of an American culture. And the refugees from the Soviet Union, from Eastern Europe, and from the other cultures and lands where life was difficult in one way, came to America where life was difficult in different ways. And the next generations were not immigrants from Eastern Europe or Asia. They were immigrants from Philadelphia and California, and Boston and Florida, etc. And it was interesting being born within this culture and this country. We came suddenly into a community where we were suddenly the immigrants, because they were the core. There's a community that was defined by this interesting transplanted culture, but then we became the transplants. That was difficult for us. It's difficult for everybody. It's difficult today also, but it's a different sort of difficulty, a different context. But each of us, coming from whatever background we're coming from, has to deal with the fact that we're coming into a culture which is initially not home. It's not what I grew up in. It's not the world. It's not the perspective I grew up in. It's not the information that that molded my mind as I was growing up, etc. And especially in those days, in the 70s, They didn't know how to handle us. It was it was a big struggle in those days to find yourself at home in that culture. I happened to work for a number of the meisters, a number of the institutions in Crown Heights, various capacities. I worked in 770 with Rabbi Krinsky and Company. I worked for the Hechs, if you're familiar with the Hadar Torah Yeshiva and Machana and the National Committee for Furtherance of Jewish Education. They were in charge of the release time program. There's a lot of activities in that organization. In those days, I was mostly producing educational and fundraising materials. I was a video producer. I was a writer and filmmaker in that lifetime, and I used to say that one of the greatest miracles of the arc of my experience as a quote unquote Baal Teshuva was that I stayed from throughout all of those interactions, because it took a while to feel at home. I used to say, the expression that Moshe Rabbeinu names his son Gershom. He said, why did he name Gershom? Because Ger means a stranger, a sojourner. He says, because I'm a sojourner in a foreign land, a stranger in a strange land. There was a famous science fiction novel back in the day called Stranger in a Strange Land, and it was about aliens coming from Mars and this clash of cultures, really, and what was going on over there. I was there was one point at which I was finding myself in a situation where I was very accepted, I was very warmly welcomed, and I had a role to play, but it didn't feel like the families felt. I was not from the family. So I said, at one point, you know what, I'm like a stranger in a strange womb. Like I'm being nurtured in a community where I'm not sure that I quite belong here. How did I, one has to establish one's identity, and it gets back to what we were talking about before. If we are returning to our essential self, who is that person that we're returning to? What is the identity that I'm striving to recapture a relationship with? What is my essential identity? Not only my nefesh elokis, not only my godly soul, not only that chelek elokami ma'al, that portion of God from above, but what flavor is that portion? Which portion? What are we talking about here? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I feel differently from you. I see things differently from you. I have a different purpose from you. And we each have to refine and define who we are in that context. I don't have too much time, so I'm going to kind of jump over a couple of things that I would ordinarily say in that context, but really it fits to go like that. That's our individuality that we have to define. Who am I, and how do I get there? How do I chart the path of return of Teshuva into that person who I optimally am? Like, in other words, what's my purpose in life? And how do I get back on track about my purpose in life? Or if I'm on track, how do I improve my path towards my purpose in life? How do I get rid of the distractions or the extraneous parts that I don't want to be parts of myself anymore? Or at least lesser influence. Maybe there'll inevitably be some part, but of lesser influence. They're not going to take over the show. They're not going to be, vanquishing the rest of the small city that our parts are fighting over. And then on the other hand, an essential aspect of who we are and what our Teshuva is about is also bringing health and balance and equanimity to our relationships with the larger group. I talked about the friends who became thrown together in those days. Each of us has many layers of belonging. You guys belong to a yeshiva here. Each of you belongs to a family. We belong to the geographical location of Miami. We belong to America, And all that represents for the United States of America and the American vision, the American dream, the American experiment. There's something unique about this culture. The Rebbe used to call it a Malchus Shel Chesed, a land of, a kingdom of loving kindness. Unlike so many, the majority of governments and nations and cultures that came before, the American experiment was built on a collaborative, harmonious, unified vision of democracy, of equality, of all men are created equal, etc., endowed with their creator, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all this foundational, and this is a new thing. So we have identity as Americans. We have identity as Jews. We have identity as people who are very closely associated with Chabad. We might call ourselves Lubavitchers. We might call ourselves Bali Tshuva, and we might not be able to call ourselves any of those things yet because we're still trying to figure out where we belong. Do I belong here, or am I still a stranger in a strange womb? These two aspects of our individuality, on the one hand, and our sense of belonging, various levels. I didn't go to bigger levels. We're all human beings. We're Jewish people. Jewish people are one. We belong to the Jewish people. We also belong to the family of nations. We're earthlings. Eventually we're going to find out that other places we could belong to that are beyond planet Earth, or we won't. That remains to be seen. How do we balance those two? How do we focus on returning to the essence of who we are as individuals, and yet also improve our relationships with and our sense of belonging in the larger sphere, in the family, in the yeshiva, in the culture, in among the Jewish people, American Jews, Israeli Jews, people who speak a different language, people who think a different way, who listen to one kind of music as opposed to another kind of music, whatever the case may be, people of a professional affinity group. Doctors and lawyers each speak their doctor and lawyer languages, etc. And then you're going to get married, raise a family, and you have to learn what language your wife speaks, what sensibilities are most important, or what triggers are triggers for her that are not necessarily triggers for you, and vice versa. We have to belong, and yet we have to retain the integrity of our own position. All of this requires that we wrap our arms around the avoda, the privilege of doing tshuva with all of that. I'm not just doing tshuva for myself. I'm doing tshuva for all of these levels of belonging, and I bring that with me. It's one of the reasons we daven with a minyan. There's a pasuk in Pesukei D'Zimra where we say that all the rivers are clapping hands. Every river has a noise, has a tone, has a rushing stream. Every river of thought, every stream of consciousness, the river of thought that every individual has, we all got something going on that's different from what the guy davening next to us is going on. They're clapping hands. They're all finding a rhythm and a harmony in which we can function as a kehila, as a community, as a minyan, as a shul, whatever it is, and as many shuls all over the world. We all want to sing in harmony and clap hands. That's work. And in order to do that, each of us has to cultivate our individuality and cultivate the relationship with the various layers of belonging. And bring that to our tshuva. Bring that to our tefillah. Bring that into our relationship with Hashem. I'm beginning to talk because it's time, we don't have any more time, about taking all that and bringing that into our face-to-face relationship with Hashem and saying, Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here I am, and here we are. We're all here. Help us harmonize internally and communally. Not time for it now, but we can extrapolate from this also, or relate this to a core concept in Hasidus, which is the idea that Hashem is both Mamala Kol Alamin and Sovev Kol Alamin. He penetrates into the world in such a way as there's a different kind of life force in this sefer and this community and this person and those bricks on the wall. And Sovev Kol Alamin, which he encompasses and surrounds the entire world as one. And there's no difference between me and you. There's no difference between any aspect of the created world according to this aspect of Sovev Kol Alamin. So these ideas that I'm talking about the harmonization of individuality and community, and family, all these different layers of belonging, they can all be understood to be expressions of this idea in Chassidus of Mamala and Sovev. It's called the immanent aspect of godliness and the transcendent aspect of godliness. Take that with you. You'll learn about that stuff. You probably already have to some extent, but you're going to keep learning about it more and more because Sovev and Mamala is one of those core principles.
Yeah.
Take it with you and run with it. I wish we had a little bit more time.
We'll have to do another time. I'll have to do a Hampshire.
So what?
You encapsulate the whole thing into the point.
Whoever's the eight that are coming,
be who you are, and be who you're with, and take all of that, not conflict, but harmonization of opposites in a way. Bring that together and make that a focus of your tshuva.
See you next time. Can't wait.
Thank you
so much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good to meet you guys.
Good to see you. I'm inspired.